Welcome everybody. Yeah, I think everybody's familiar with the agenda and the forum for the coffee chat. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's mainly just a platform for where we can share inspirational stories. And if you just take one small thing away of today, then we've actually achieved what we set out to do with this forum. Last week, we had a personal trainer share her story with us. And I never knew how much effort actually goes into the preparation for each one of her clients and what it takes to actually execute each one of the hourly sessions with each client that she has. It's actually quite daunting. But this week we've got a slightly different agenda. So in keeping with our Women's Month theme, we have our third lady that we are going to share her story with us today. Then I'll open up for Q&A, and then I'm going to ask the lady to share with us the takeaways or the lessons learned from her story, and then we just wrap up. Okay, so today's chat is about women in business, part 3. Now, the lady that we're going to hear from is a very accomplished lady. She's basically seen and done it all, far more than a lot of us. My name is Juso. This is Cathy Eve, and she's got 3 decades of experience in fast-moving consumer goods, and she's got quite a strong technical background, which sort of morphed into a marketing career in sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. Cathy studied life sciences at university, and she graduated with an honors degree in microbiology. That's quite a leap from microbiology to marketing. Anyway, she joined Unilever as a management trainee, and after heading up the packaging development for the local Unilever group, she was moved off to the Netherlands, and where she spent 5 years there. And this exposed her to more countries around the world, more markets, and more technologies. Then she moved back to South Africa, and she headed up the first Africa Regional Innovation Center in the group. And then over time, moved more directly into the marketing space, and was eventually appointed to the executive team as marketing director for Spreads. And then in 2005, she decided to go off to London Business School, to do a slow and finish program, and graduated in 2006. And then came back to South Africa, and then started consulting on innovation practice, and also lecturing at Rhodes Business School for their MBA in marketing module. But then she started finding that she was missing the cross-functional teamwork of a big corporate. So she joined Parmalat in Stellenbosch as head of marketing in 2008. And this also involved now being shifted off to Italy and working in the corporate marketing team. And for the next 12 years, she was in Parmalat in all different aspects. And then in early 2020, she resigned from corporate and is busy setting up her own business to work in process management and people development. So she has quite a bio. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unshare my screen and hand over to Cathy, and then let her tell you her story. Over to you, Cathy.
Yeah, this one. There we go. Can you all see it? Is it showing? Okay, thanks, Richard. I think we've covered off quite a lot of what I'm going to talk about, but I'll try to give you some of the personal takeouts to go from all of those different things. It's really a great privilege to share my story, and hopefully everyone will pick up something that is either useful or a little bit inspiring. It is very strange times. We're in the middle of, we're not really in the middle of lockdown. Lockdown is sort of easing off, but of course we still have a virus, and a virus is very unpredictable behavior as far as I can make out. And it's making a lot of demands on us in terms of how we operate, how we socialize, what we can and we can't do. And even if the virus is easing off slightly, we are going to have to face the global economic fallout from consecutive lockdowns all over the world, banning of travel and tourism, as well as a lot of political tension everywhere. I mean, we think we're particularly bad, but I've chatted to friends from around the world, and we're all facing the same thing. There's a level of corruption at government level, which is causing instability, a huge amount of inequality around the world, and of course, the issue of discrimination. And in Women's Month, that's discrimination based on all kinds of different criteria. So this is perhaps the most tumultuous time of the last 100 years. And it will give us a lot of challenges. And I hope that some of the things that I've done and learned are things that would help people to manage these types of challenges. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and reflect a little bit on what that means in business. So my life has taken, oh, now what do I do? So my life has taken a lot of twists and turns. I think Richard has alluded to that. And of course, twists and turns are what you need to do when you're dealing with a crisis. The big hot topic at the moment is pivoting. So you pivot your business from online training, like Renee spoke to us about last week, to training online, which she's absolutely brilliant at. And she's been training me several times a week ever since actually slightly before the lockdown. But, you know, companies have changed from making alcohol to sanitizer. All kinds of restaurants have had to turn into home delivery depots. And the more you have experienced in life and the more different things that you've done, I think the easier it is to kind of think about pivoting. And I've certainly pivoted my own career quite a couple of times. I won't start at the very beginning, but let me just say that I do come from a very academic family. My father was a professor of chemistry. My mother is a poet and a master's in English literature. And of course, that shaped me in many, many ways. I never had any business experience in the family. I mean, we were all teachers and lecturers and whatever. But one thing it taught me right from the beginning was to be incredibly curious and to use knowledge and lean on books and research and read and try to search for meaning and truth in everything. In my lockdown, I've finally got on to trying to understand philosophy, which was way beyond most science students. So, but it is something that I think really helps me to operate better in the world. Then I went to university. Some of you might recognize this university, although I know it is in competition slightly to Stellenbosch. I studied science. As Richard said, I ended up with an honors degree in microbiology. In fact, I worked on viruses, specifically poliovirus at the time, but on vaccines and stuff like that. And at the time, I thought, oh, what kind of career can you have in virology? Fast forward to 2020, and the virologists are ruling the world. And epidemiology is a hot new topic. And anyway, I left all that behind because I didn't like the idea of spending the rest of my life in a laboratory with viruses. And I got plucked out of university by Unilever as a management trainee. And so for the first time, I was exposed to a whole new world of brands and countries and organization and making money, which was sort of a slightly foreign concept coming from an academic family. And in fact, not even really in the laboratory, I went straight into packaging development. So instead of dealing with test tubes and medium to grow viruses and bacteria, I was dealing with structures of packaging and designs and more the technical side, but obviously I interacted a lot with the marketing department in terms of printing. I loved the whole how printing worked, all the different machines that we had to design for. And I love being really at the forefront of packaging development in the group, and packaging was the first place that the consumer interacts with your brand. So yeah, it was a steep learning curve, but huge amount of fun. About 5 years later, I was sent to the Netherlands to the Foods Division Central Research Center. That is it. You can see even the building is in the shape of a U. They're so committed to the U, and it's right on the harbour in Rotterdam. So actually, one of my office somewhere down there in the front had a view overlooking one of the largest harbours in the world. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So I pretended to be Dutch. I visited lots of tulip fields. I saw lots of windmills. I rode lots of bicycles. I actually had 2 bicycles, as all Dutch people do have, one for shopping and one for sport. While I was there, I was really lucky to have the responsibility to work with a lot of different countries. So I ran projects all over Africa, which at the time for a South African was pretty unusual. I ran packaging courses in West Africa, in East Africa, and of course in Southern Africa, but also all over Europe and in the UK. So it was really a great time, and I learned a lot about innovation. The Netherlands itself is an innovative country, but I worked with a very, very quirky English packaging engineer, who really taught me that the power of innovation is in combining your consumer insights with the technology that you have available. So innovation is not something that happens in a lab or in an idea session but when you understand, particularly for FMCG, but in any organization, you understand your customer, and then you match what technology is available. Those really make the best innovations. So with this little piece of wisdom under my belt, I came back to South Africa. As Richard said, I headed up the first regional innovation center in one of the foods categories. That meant rolling out food innovations across Africa, investing in equipment in all of those countries. But what was most important was that it was a combined marketing and an R&D team. And the first thing, so the marketing manager, who's now a very good friend of mine, and I were sort of joint heads of this innovation center. And the first thing that I managed to do was to persuade the GM to move us into one office, which was hugely important. And people underestimate that the interaction of sales, of technical and marketing together really, really is beneficial when it comes to innovation. We were able to prototype stuff really, really quickly. We walked down the passage, we shared the same vision, and most importantly, we did the same consumer research. So I headed up a field research project, which we call Project I, which was to really understand the cooking and eating habits of low-income consumers in South Africa. And we went to, I think, a couple of hundred homes unannounced, deep in rural areas, in all of the townships, and just observed women, mainly women, obviously, preparing the meal for the evening. So we go just after lunch, and it was fascinating. And having technical people there watching, okay, so that's what they do with that product. Maybe it would be better if they were able to do that instead, made all the difference. And it was obligatory for everyone in our team, marketing and R&D, to go out and observe those visits, and watch the videos over and over again. I refuse point blank to have a research agency summarize anything, because research agencies confirms, well, I mean, I love research agencies and I've worked with some extremely good ones, but there's always the risk that you miss something small. So it's really important that all of you attend. So after a few years of really lots of fun and success, the marketing director said, interfering in marketing for so long, why don't you try doing it for yourself? And I thought, so easy from the outside. Marketing was a walk in the park, I just guess everything. But the challenge was really that in technical, you have some certainty around your outcome. In marketing, you're trying to predict behavior and look into the future and make decisions on behalf of people that are not necessarily exactly the same as you. So dealing with unknowns and being able to try to see the patterns in unknowns became the most important thing I learned in marketing. Obviously, I picked up a lot of other marketing skills. I had to certainly deal with agencies and talk about communication and make television ads and spend money on media. So, I mean, a million things that I had never done all came onto my plate in those couple of years. Then one of the things that happened during that time was that Unilever went through a very large merger. Globally, they had bought a company called Best Foods, which owned Robertson's Foods in South Africa. We all know Robertson's Herbs and Spices, and the Knorr brand. And Unilever had owned the Royco brand. So there was a huge amount of overlap. And the Competition Commission, because it was a very big merger, the Competition Commission needed to give us permission before we were allowed to integrate the businesses. So I was sort of seconded full-time to the competition team and the negotiation team. I had never studied any economics. I didn't know anything about economic modeling and competition regulation. I quickly learned. I read the Act cover to cover. I knew all aspects of it, and I helped the legal and economics team put together the justification for our merger, which included in the end quite a complicated remedy. So we sold off part of the business, we swapped around brands, all kinds of very exciting things. So another huge learning curve and another aspect of business that I was able to learn along the way. When the company finally merged, I moved out of the category that I had been in, and I was appointed onto the board, the Unilever Operational Board, Unilever Foods Operational Board, as the category marketing director, as Richard said, for the spreads business. This was really being responsible for the total business, for the money, for the profit, and I had a completely cross-functional team working for me. So I had accountants, logistics, production, R&D, marketing, sales, in a matrix organization, because in corporates we love matrix organizations. And I had to learn more about the P&L of the business, and how to get cross-functional teams to work really, really well to deliver the results. And we were doing relatively well. We had quite some challenge supply chain, which was new to me, but we did deliver all the results. Then I thought, okay, I've conquered that. That feels like the top of that tree. I headed off to London Business School. I thought I wanted to be fully academic, like my family. And I thought, I've never studied any of these business subjects, and if I want to teach or train or develop people in business, I need to have some business training. So I was really, really lucky to be able to go and do a Sloan Fellowship. It's a master's degree for sort of mid to late career people rather than an MBA. We were a small class of just 40 people from all over the world, and from very different businesses. So apart from the academic learning that I had at London Business School, I also learned a lot about all my colleagues and the businesses they came from and the countries they came from. And being the bossy boots that I am, I ran the social club for our class, and we had a national theme every 2 weeks, and you had to set up an event that was typical of your country, and also a quiz so that we all could learn something about the country. Obviously, the South African one was a lot of fun, but it ended up with rather too many Springboks in the South African pub in London. But we had a really, really great time. So London Business School is a finance school primarily, so I didn't learn that much about marketing, new stuff about marketing, but I did learn about putting concepts and structures behind a practical experience. But of course, South Africa called me back. I love coming back, so I did. And as Richard said, I went into doing some innovation consulting and a little bit of lecturing. It seems academics like to have people who've got lots of academic experience rather than practical experience. So I just did the one course at the Rhodes Business School, doing the marketing module, which was a lot of fun. But my biggest client at the time was Premier, and they had been bankrupt, and they have an enormously large capital investment, and a pennies business. I mean, bread and maize and flour are not high margin categories. So they've been pulled out of bankruptcy by a very clever investment banker by profession. And I learned a huge amount about really managing cash in a difficult business. I mean, Unilever was never short of cash, and cash was sort of managed at a very high level. So this was hands-on, how do we make it work? I ran some innovation projects, and I hope you've all used those muffin mixers, because we extended that range together with a cross-functional team. I was about to move up to Joburg when the opportunity came to come to Parmalat. And I thought, well, I have missed being part of the cross-functional team. And well, I've never really thought about living in the Western Cape, but Stellenbosch looks like a really beautiful place to live, which it is. So I decided to move back into corporate, and I was head of marketing for Parmalat. It was, I have to say, quite a roller coaster, a very different business to Unilever. To start with, it was also a listed company, but listed in Italy. After a year, I went and spent just over a year in Italy in the corporate head office, which is in Parmalat, means palm milk. And I worked with Canada, Australia, Russia, Italy, Portugal, those types of countries on sort of coordination of marketing stuff. But I was only there really in exile for a short time. While there was a change of leadership in South Africa, and I came back to South Africa, back into the marketing role. And we had, I mean, it's a huge, dairy is a very complicated business. You're run by cows, and I don't mean women who are at the top of the business. I mean those things down in the bottom left-hand corner that provide the milk when they feel like it. I had to learn Italian, obviously. I had to learn also about very, very low margin business. And then in 2011, the business was bought by a French company, a privately owned French company. So it is now the biggest dairy company in the world through a series of acquisitions. And very different to work in a company where the owner is personally involved, the owner of what is now a nearly 20 billion euro company. I'm met with 4 times a year across the table to talk about the business. And the decision making in a family business is very different from the decision making in a listed company. I was responsible for South Africa, but also the other African countries. We had actual operations on the ground with sales, marketing, production, milk collection, everything in countries. So I spent a lot of time in Zambia. Mozambique obviously is a hugely volatile, uncertain market. And that was one of the greatest challenges, because one of the courses I did at London Business School was strategy in uncertain markets. And for sure, we had to use it in Mozambique. Then I think probably one of the highlights, and if any of you have ever heard of G.G. Alcock or read his book called Carsinomics, which is all about the money at the bottom of the South African pyramid. And the South African pyramid is very different to the Indian pyramid of Parmalat's book called The Bottom of the Pyramid. But Gigi was in charge of Minanawi, and we engaged Minanawi to help us with processed cheese slices. And I mean, it really turned into an enormous business. And it's a model that we rolled out across the region, which required a lot of deep understanding of what the food habits are in each of those countries. I mean, in South Africa, it's quite clear. It's a quarter, you have a cheese slice with Russian polony and a piece of on your quarter, or a vetkoek or magwenya. And in each country, there are slightly different versions of that sort of food, and also understanding the value chain of how to make money and how your small retailer will make money was really important. So this became really an enormous success story, very, very profitable for Parmalat, and obviously a lot of challenge from competitors. So it was fun, and I think there are a lot of learnings. And any of you who are following Gigi, he's left Minanawi, but I think that this part of the market where there are a lot of informal traders will recover a lot more quickly and more successfully than a lot of formal businesses in South Africa after the lockdown. So they obviously suffered hugely during lockdown, but they have the flexibility and ability to change their model, move forward. Okay. The last thing I did at Parmalat, I resigned sort of early last year, but they kept on persuading me to stay a little bit longer. The last thing I did was rename the business. the French company, which is Lactalis. So the Italian listing was finally market, and we became Lactalis South Africa at the end of January, basically. It was a nice project because it involved all the people communicating the reason for the change and trying to build some pride in the total business and the history of the business over time. I mean, the reality is that Parmalat only came to South Africa in 1998 or 1999. Before that, it was Bonita. Before that, there were all kinds of small companies. So we wove that whole story together to say this is a new chapter, and the business has emerged. So I left at the end of January, leaping a little bit into the unknown, and the ball was clear, didn't have any COVID in it at the time that I left. So things haven't turned out exactly the way that I expected them to, but it's been fun. In a way, the lockdown has not really been a big problem for me. I've enjoyed my home more than I would ever have done before. I've spent more hours observing where the sun shines and where it doesn't shine than I have in the last 12 years that I've lived here, when I was at the office pretty much all the time. So if I can just, I don't know whether you want to stop there, or I'll just run through what I think are important things to remember. The one.
No, I think, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I think it's really important to understand that a business exists to provide products and services to customers or consumers in order to make money. And marketing people are very often first to be accused of forgetting that. I don't think they really forget it. But at the beginning of lockdown, I saw some of the marketing press. I was following a lot of it, and people were saying, oh, we're not allowed to advertise. Well, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to do what makes the business sustainable. So yes, advertising has a role, but if the business can't afford it, you don't do it. If you can't afford new curtains, you don't put them up in your house. So even though they might be damaging the furniture inside because of the sunlight. So marketing is a process, in my view. It's the process of making sure that your customers or consumers are interested in the products and services that your business is providing, in order for the business to achieve its goal of making money. And making money in a sustainable way. I'm absolutely sure that blind focus on profitability is not the right way to win in the long term. And in fact, there has been quite a lot of research that says companies who have a fundamentally more expensive cost base, so in other words, they invest more in what they provide, often do better in the long term than people who are always penny pitching and trying to optimize short-term profits. So what are my top tips and the things that I think have helped me get where I've got? The first one is learn. Never stop being curious. Obviously, famous quote from Albert Einstein, once you stop learning, you start dying. I am constantly curious. And when I wrote people in the team, there were also people who were curious. People who, like, why does the consumer do that? Why don't they do it that way? You need to have an open mind to learning new things all the time. And the learning will enable you to make more creative suggestions and solutions for your business. Creativity, in my mind, is not the rabbit out of the hat magic. It's a process of a lot of deep understanding and curiosity that comes up with a perfect creative solution to something. Then, absolutely critical that you need to know your business and you need to know your numbers. I have to say Unilever was a little bit less focused on numbers than Lactalis. Lactalis is an incredibly detailed, spreadsheet-orientated business. And whilst it's not my favorite thing to love the numbers, I knew every single number in the business, because if you want to talk to the rest of the business and make sure that you're part of the team, you need to be able to analyze the numbers in the same way that the finance director can. Then you need to know your consumers. I talked about Project I, but we did many, many more of these projects over the years. You need to get into the shoes of your consumer or your customer, so that you can really try and understand what they do. And getting in the shoes was something that we did at Unilever not only for our consumers, but also just people in general. To understand other people, you need to get in their shoes or in their minds. And as a marketing person, it's not only important to understand your consumers and your customers, but also your colleagues, because you need to show the direction and pull the business forward. And if you don't know how to engage them and what they're thinking, you'll really struggle to do that. Collaboration, I've talked about it many, many times, but for me, collaboration is critical. You're all in the same boat. And it might seem strange, but companies forget this. In fact, at Lactalis, there's a huge focus on silos, and they're global silos of industrial versus commercial versus marketing versus financial. And it doesn't serve the business well. And I ran 2 large projects at Parmalat to integrate everybody around a category. So around yogurt first, and we turned the yogurt business around from non-profit to profit, and actually increased our market share and at the same time. And also then more recently in cheese. But you have to be working on this together in a business. I mean, high-performing marketeers excel at linking the departments together, and that's Mark Deswan Arons, who was a very well-known consultant in the Netherlands. I mean, that's what they do. We need to bridge the silos between different functions. So collaboration is critical. And then you never stop communicating. Stop communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that's both internally and externally. And communication is more complicated than it sounds, because it's not only what you say, but also what is heard. And you can't blame your consumer if they don't understand your message. You can only blame yourself if your message is not correctly understood. So I've done a lot of communication, and I love communication. But you can always learn more about how to be clearer and more concise. And perhaps this is another example of that. And then the last thing I would say to everybody, and my first well, not my first, but when we were great bosses in Unilever, who I worked for both in South Africa and in the Netherlands, always said to me, have fun. If you come into the office and it's not fun, then you need to go and find something else to do, because you must enjoy it, and you must share your fun and enthusiasm and energy with other people. And I've certainly done a lot of that over the years. I would say don't just chase the money. Obviously, you have to chase some money because you have to pay the bills, but it shouldn't be too much of a drudge to have to do that. So find what you love, if you possibly can, or balance out what you love with how you earn your money, and that will make for a happy life and a successful career. It has for me. Back to you, Richard.
Thanks for that, Cathy. That was, wow. The breadth of your experience is quite inspirational. Yeah, I need to digest what you told us today. So I think, while I'm still trying to digest this, let's just open it up for questions, and I'm sure there must be lots and lots of people who have questions for you. Are there any questions? Maybe I'll start off with. Cathy, you mentioned that innovation and creativity doesn't happen like a rabbit out of a hat. It's actually a process that happens in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I've been in corporates as well, where innovation was only recognized years later, where there was a need for something, and we went out and we tried to find out what the solution to the problem was, and eventually the whole group worldwide adopted what we had done and said it was very innovative. But at that particular moment in time, we didn't think that we were doing great things. We were just trying to solve a problem.
Well,
what's your take on that?
I think the clue is in trying to solve the problem, because but there's no need for a business if it's not to solve a problem, and there's no need for a product if it's not to solve a problem or a service if it's to solve a problem for a customer. So understanding what that problem is critical, and understanding how people interact with it. In my experience, when we had a brilliant idea in the technical function factory and we put it on the market, it needed a huge amount of investment in marketing and communication for people to come along with that. But if you put something on the market that people intuitively find useful or find tasty or find fits into their daily habits, it will fly. And so the processed cheese slice, for example, is a really good example, because we'd say to people use processed cheese slices, they have no flipping clue what to do. But when we started introducing them onto foods that they liked already, it was like, oh yeah, actually this really adds to the flavor, and I like the idea of having cheese, and so I'll put more and more on it. I mean, the guru wacko from the UK guy that taught me about innovation worked in the tea category. And I mean, tea is a huge commodity globally. And so trying to find the perfect tea bag was always everybody's mission. And he said, you know, you ask people how they make tea, they'll tell you. But when you watch people make tea and they pick the tea bag out of the cup and they walk across the kitchen and drip the tea all the way along the floor, you think, maybe a dripless tea bag would be something that they would use. They'll never tell you that. You have to watch them and observe that. And I think from what I understand in the software industry, and what Apple do so incredibly well, is understand how people respond to technology and then try and replicate that in the operating systems so that it's more intuitive and that people don't have to overcome this huge barrier to usage. And for me, that's real innovation. And it's not big innovation that looks new and shiny. It's innovation that just makes something more worth having for your customer.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question, please, Cathy?
Sure, Elani, but not how many steps I did today.
How many squats?
No, not 2 squats yet. I'm in my gym type now.
It's really fascinating what you've been going through and all the innovations. But you've now sort of jumped out of the fishbowl into it, which was supposed to be clear waters, but it's a little bit murky now. What is the process? Your train of thought for moving forward with your business?
Okay, so when I leapt out, the plan was to do a lot of networking. Well, the plan was always to take a little bit of a sabbatical, because I had ignored lots of things in my life that are important, like my mother, specifically my family in general, but my mother, who, you know, I was always too busy to go and visit. So I have done quite a bit of that. And then the plan was really to network as much as possible and find opportunities to talk to people and share my experiences and see whether there were opportunities in small businesses that I could help, mainly with process and with team collaboration, because those are the things that I'm most passionate about. But you know, I was pretty open to doing anything. And of course, the lockdown has made networking just a little bit more tricky, because you've got to do it all online and you can't just pop out and have a cup of coffee with somebody and see what the opportunities are. So that has been a bit of a challenge. I'm busy putting together. What it has given me is an opportunity to learn a lot more, and there were a huge number of resources available online. London Business School held some fantastic webinars on how to deal with COVID. So I studied all of those, and as I said, I've been reading history and philosophy and things that fascinate me, and trying to see how they link back to the workplace. In the meanwhile, I have also picked up some mentoring. So I have a passion for passing on my knowledge to other people. So I'm doing a little bit of mentoring, which you can do online, and that's fun. But yeah, I mean, I've still got to get out there. So linking to other people who are in similar businesses. Obviously, I've got quite a large network of marketing people who are all out on their own. So trying to hook up with them. And at the end, I'm going to have to start making some cold calls, and I'm not very good at that. And I'm not sound very confident, but inside I'm not always as confident as that. And so going out and asking people if I could do work for them is going to be quite tricky. But network, talk, read, learn, and have faith that, you know, things will come together.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thanks for that, Cathy. Has anybody else got any questions?
Yeah, I have. It's Sue Smith here from Cape Town. I just want to find out, so you've had lots of networking and chatting with people across the businesses, and I've done similar, you know, because business is quiet. And I'm in the service industry, but it's psychometrics,
okay.
Which is proving to be quite tricky, you know, to try and get people to do online assessments instead of face-to-face. It's quite interesting. I would have thought that it would have been more welcome, but across a lot of the sectors it has been. But I think with technology being a bit of a challenge, and access to internet and things like that, it's been a bit of a barrier. So my question is, you know, the challenges that you're hearing about, would it be more product related and getting product on the shelf, or would it be more service oriented, being able to deliver a personal type of service with the same, how can I put it, the same vibe, the same empathy and good spy, if you want to call it that, as one would have prior to this? And, you know, in your opinion, what do you think we should be changing to make it more appealing, or to make it more inviting, and at least daunting for people from a service perspective?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I've chatted to quite a lot of people who are obviously in the business in Unilever and also in Parmalat and other businesses. And I think that the real problem has not been as much getting product on the shelf, and certainly not in the basic food categories. But of course, it depends hugely on which industry you're in. I think that the shock and the difficulty of getting businesses going again is not yet hitting people's consciousness, because it's been a scramble to survive and to save money and cut anything that's regarded as unnecessary cost. And that includes sometimes advertising, but I'm sure it includes a lot of people development stuff. And the reality is that until people really start coming back to work and facing each other again, they won't realize how traumatic this process and this experience has been for everybody. And everybody has experienced it differently. So I have, in my own team that I worked with at Parmalat, one guy absolutely over the moon, loves working from home, lives in his own in Cape Town, in a nice place. He's online all day, doesn't have to drive through to Stellenbosch, and he's fairly self-contained. And another one lives in the northern suburbs, has 2 kids that have homeschooling, a husband who's self-employed, and so, you know, all of that security stuff goes out the window, and her experience of working at home is completely different. Now, businesses, big corporates like Parmalat, are not going to really see that and understand it and need to do anything about it until people are back in the office. So it might be that there's a time lag, and maybe there might be some work coming out of people trying to reintegrate and trying to do innovation again in the office. I don't know. In terms of my own experience of doing the mentoring, I was extremely worried about not meeting people face to face, because I'm a very high F in MBIT terms, and personal connection is critical for me. But actually, it can work online, and I think people just need, younger people are more confident, but in general, people are confident. I mean, last week we had Renee. Renee has been training me online, as I said, since before lockdown. I think she was anxious about it. I was like, well, I'm not sure this is going to work. I've worked harder and I'm stronger than I was before, because it just works. So I think, yeah, connectivity, there's nothing much you can do about it, but I think people will build more and more confidence in online communication, and you have to believe that. But I think big business is not ready to spend money on team building and personal development at the moment, but I think it has to come. Answers your question at all.
Yes, it does. Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate it. It's nice to hear your perspective, because it's actually interesting that, you know, that it must say it is the sort of older generation that almost need this face-to-face connection. I don't know whether it's from a trust factor or it's just old school habit. The younger folk are quite happy to have an online interview. I mean, we've got online interview, virtual interviews that we make use of, and there's a whole bunch of things that which I'm very pleased to say that this lockdown has actually created a forced integration into the digital age, which I think we've been lacking. And I think also our industry makes it more globally competitive. So, you know, I'm doing a lot of free mentoring as well to people, to small companies that are struggling, just to try and help them. And also, you know, if you've got time on your hands, why not share the knowledge? You don't know where that help is going to go in the future. So, you know, it's quite nice to be able to do that. And it also gives one experience in this arena. So, you know, anybody who's on the platform that is a little bit reticent about extending their hand out to help companies, even if it is on a pro bono here and there, you know, you never know what the benefits will be later on for yourself and for the companies that you help. But I think I do agree with you. A lot of people are struggling to be at home. And I think what I'm also finding is that people are being performance managed at home, and they're working at home, they've got kids and they're being performance managed. So therein is a huge challenge. Yeah. I think for a lot of companies. How do you performance manage somebody that you are used to seeing on a day-to-day basis? You know what they're doing, and suddenly things are changing and you can't see it and you can't measure it. So yeah, to me, that's quite fascinating. Now, I agree with you. It's going to take time to realize the real impact of all of this, and possibly a big scramble at some stage when, you know, income does start pulling in, to realize that we all know that the human capital is only as good as the people that work for you. So it's worth the investment in getting people coached, even if it is, you know, online mentorship. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. I'm finding this whole space very innovative, and I must say, I myself have become very innovative, very creative. So yeah, it's been interesting. I've even taken up painting.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm really yeah, it's cool.
Well, you know, if dinosaurs don't adapt, they die out. So I must say, at the beginning, I was also hugely nervous to go online. But I remember a friend of my brother's is a diamond dealer, for want of a better word, and he has clients all over the world. And I was having dinner with him, and he said, no one under the age of 30 can ever be a salesman. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because they just want to talk on the phone and they just want to send messages. And I said to him, well, you know, when your customers are in the same boat, you'll be the one who's can't be assisted by salespeople. They just want to get a message on the phone. So I do think there's a generation thing. I think this online stuff has sort of fast-tracked some of that change. And if you're interested, there's, I mentioned the webinars at London Business School, but if you go onto the London Business School website, there's a very good webinar by Linda Grattan. She's a professor of behavioral human development science or something or other, on working online and the research that she's done about working online and working remotely for years and years and years before lockdown, and how the lockdown has changed it. And it's really, really interesting to hear what she has to say.
Oh, thanks. I'll definitely go on that. It's Grattan. I'll remember that.
Grattan, Gratton. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. It's very useful.
Of my comments. Has anybody else got any other questions for Cathy or for anyone else? No comments. Okay, wonderful. Okay, wow, we're almost up on our time. So Cathy, thank you so much for the inspirational message. I think your story has touched quite a few people. I should have the video up and running on YouTube by this afternoon. I'm already pinged on WhatsApp by the ladies in Dubai that they couldn't make it this morning, but they are very keen to hear your story. So if there's nothing else, then we've done the takeaways already. But if you need help, or you've got questions for ourselves or for Cathy, then please get hold of us on one of those 2 email addresses on your screen. And if there's nothing else, then guys, enjoy your weekend and stay warm. It doesn't get cold.